funding outside the family. But in many colleges, they will say financial aid is need-based, based on the ability to pay, whereas scholarships and grants are merit-based. Now, keeping in mind that's not always the case, but when you're asking universities about money, ask them about funding. Do you have funding for international students? Don't say financial aid, because I've had more than one time the kid says, but you said they had money for international students, and they say no. I said, what did you say? Financial aid. They don't have that. They have scholarships. So it's one of those tricky things. The basic premise is that the families will pay as much as they can, and that the universities will be able to help, or other agencies will be able to help. It's one of my favorite pictures. By putting off our needs, we managed to put the kids through college. A decorating style. Now, you'll hear a lot of terms and acronyms that kind of may throw you, but it's very, very easy to get a hold of these things in the process. One of the big ones is what's called expected family contribution. And the expected family contribution, it means what the family is, what they determine the family is able to pay. Now, often this is not how much money you can write a check for right now, or how much money you can take out of next year's salary. It's the ability to pay over time. And there's different things that figure into this. And, you know, oops, I lost one of my slides, okay. It has to do with the number of people in the family. It has to do with the age of the oldest parent. In other words, how many more years are they going to be earning? It has to do with the number in the family that are in college. It has to do with different things, assets, how they're computing them may be different from university to university, but bottom line is, when they say the expected family contribution, it means this is the amount of funds that the university believes that you are able to pay, again, by earning over time. Now, if by chance you have more than one student that is in college at the same time, that expected family contribution is not twice, it is halved for you, one for each student. But expected family contribution. Now, in the U.S., it's also very different how they talk about the cost of university. They talk about the cost of attendance, and that's not just that's okay. It's not just the tuition. It has to do also with the other things that you would be expected to pay. And when you're talking about it for international students, they will usually talk about not only the tuition and the room and the board and those kinds of things. They'll also be talking about the transportation. They'll compute the average amount of the cost of a plane ticket every year. They'll compute books, personal expenses, and for international students, they'll figure in the cost of insurance, because they'll want you to have insurance.
I'm just trying to put the mic on so we can hear the camera.
Okay.
Sorry.
Anyway, so bottom line is that it has to do with, I'm going to post this so you can have it later, so you don't have to worry about taking it out. But in many countries, when they talk about how much it costs to go to college, they'll be telling you the tuition. In the U.S., when they talk about the cost of attendance, they're talking soup to nuts. Okay? So keep that in mind when you're comparing costs. Terms that you will hear often will be things like need blind in admissions. In other words, they are not looking at whether you need assistance. They're looking at you only academically. But a lot of schools, in actuality, are what's called need aware or need conscious. They have a finite amount of money, and so they have to decide how they're going to spend it. So they may be aware of how much need you have. A student that can pay part of it may have more chance of admissions because the university's not going to have to fund them fully. But overall, you'll wind up with other things. Like you'll have schools that will say, meet full need. And again, according to how the university defines that, meet full need as in meets and pays the tuition, or helps you with tuition, or is it the whole cost of attendance? So you have to do a little research to see what the different universities and how they are looking at all of that. So, have a little entertainment there. The types of financial aid in the U.S., or funding, comes in two different forms. One is what's called gift aid, which we all like, because you don't have to pay that back, and that's scholarships and grants, and then sometimes tuition waivers and things like that. The other one is called self-help. That means that the student may be expected to do work study, or it may be loans where you have to pay them back. So we like to get the ones on the left-hand side. The other ones will work if we have to. Now, funding, where the money comes from, this is what's the big thing. And what you have to, as international students, figure out where that's going to be coming from. There are several sources for money to help with higher education in the U.S. The federal money and the state money that comes from taxes is usually not available for international students. What you are usually able to get is what's called institutional funds, money that the university itself has through endowments and donations and different things like that, or through private organizations, either through companies or civic organizations, sometimes religious foundations, different things like that can be providing funding. But truthfully, in my 137 years of doing this approximately, mainly it's been institutional funds. That's been the main source. And again, it goes back to some of the universities have a big pot and they have to decide how they're going to use it because they want to bring in a gifted class, a class that's going to be a good class for their university. Now, the state funding, there is an exception to this. If you are going to a public university in a state that is using their tax money to fund that university, sometimes they have what's called tuition waivers for their out-of-state tuition for international students because they want more international students on their campus. And I'll talk a little bit about this later, but this is one of the things that you can sort of get in on the state funding, but it's kind of a sideways kind of thing. It's kind of nice though when it works. Types of money, another type of financial aid is merit-based. Now, merit-based doesn't always mean you're an A+ student. It doesn't mean you're always that athlete or that piccolo player. It means you have some attribute that the university wants. Sometimes it's international students. They want more international students on campus. Sometimes it's because of your commitment to community service. Sometimes it's on another talent or special attribute that you have. So always look at the university's website and see what is the reasons for their merit-based scholarships. This has nothing to do with the family's ability to pay, and it is based on what's called the sponsor's goal, whether that sponsor is a university or it is another organization. Okay? Need-based obviously is about the ability to pay, and again, it goes back to your ability to pay over time, and the university is doing the computation of what they feel like is your ability to pay. Again, I'll put this on the digest so you'll be able to see it, and I'm going to run through it kind of quickly. The principles of need analysis means that they want it to be equitable. It may not be equal for every student, but it needs to be equitable so that they can explain to people why this person got some funding and this one didn't. Two students from the same school with what we up here has the same background and everything, and they come up with different financial aid awards, that means that whatever's being presented to the university is different, and we're not seeing it as different. There are several different forms and documents that are required in this process, and at the end I have a link to all of them. I've got a couple of them that I'll share with you tonight on hard copies, but you're going to have to fill out some kind of documentation. You're going to have to fill out some kind of application in most cases. Now, sometimes there's a university-based form. Sometimes there is what's called an international student financial aid application, like this. And sometimes there's what's called the CSS profile. Now, the CSS profile is used for both U.S. students and international students. It's electronic form. But what you have to do is look and see what the university requires. And they will say very specifically which one that they require. And fill that out. So if they're saying they want the CSS profile and you send this in, they're going to say, don't want it. They have specific questions they want. If they have their own form, again, they're asking for specific questions on that form. Now, again, it has to do with what the university wants to do. If they're doing it for need-based, they're going to need to know financials. If they're doing it merit-based, they may have a totally different application that has to do more about the student as an individual. Somewhere along the line, they may ask for proof or documentation. And this can be in the form of many things. And you don't have to be a U.S. citizen for them to ask this. They may ask for tax information for your home country. They may ask for, if you don't have that because your country's not asking you to fill out taxes because you're overseas, they may ask for a statement of earnings from your company so they know how much it is. Sometimes they'll ask for things like a bank statement. Sometimes they'll ask for what's called a bank letter. We'll have to do that in a minute, okay? But what they're trying to do for the need base is they're trying to assess how much funding you have available to you. The CSS profile is on the College Board website. It is one that you will have to fill out. It is not as complicated as tax forms, but it is very in-depth. So I would suggest you set aside time to go and see what kinds of information they're asking for. The one big key is to make sure that whatever you use for the name on this form, that you use the same name for the application, and that matches the passport. Because using a nickname or a different spelling or a hyphen when it's not a hyphen and other things means that you're two different people, okay? Now, one of the things, this form is you can fill it out in any currency. All the questions are in English, but if you are, for example, here working for a company that's paying you in your home currency, you're able to do it in the home currency. You don't have to do it in dollars. They're able to convert it, okay? It's a single application for several universities. Not all universities ask for the profile. There's only about 400 schools that are asking for that. Okay, again, towards the time they're asking for certification of finances, you'll need that for proving that you can pay, and you'll need that for the embassy when you're getting your visa. And that's a different form. It may be a form like this, or it may be a form from the university. But bottom line is it's certifying that you are able to pay what you say you're able to pay. You get into kind of a when is too early to submit it and when is too late. Throughout the process, talk with the university about when they want this information. Because some of the information, if you provide it too early to the university, you have to get it again for the U.S. Embassy. Because documents for the U.S. Embassy can't be more than 6 months old. So if you're asking for a certification of finances from the bank to stamp this, you want to wait until after Christmas so that it's still valid when you're going to the embassy. Okay? Now, this sounds like a no-brainer. You must apply to institutions that say they offer financial assistance to international students, because if they say they don't, they're not going to change their mind in the middle. And one of my most heartbreaking times was many years ago. I had a student applying to university. It was her dream school. They said up front, we do not have any funding for international students. And in the end, she kept saying, but I want to go there. And her parents could not afford it. And her mom's calling crying, her dad's calling and crying, and all her friends are mad at her. And it's like, you got to let this one go. You've got to go to one of the schools that has offered you, and 2 schools offering her a full ride. You need to look at those schools. All along, you knew that that wasn't going to happen. But again, they're very clear. They say up front, they're not hiding this information. I'll show you some of the websites that I'll tell you about it. If you're not sure, ask them. If they say they don't, and they're not going to change the little cycle. Make sure you know whether it's need-based or merit-based. And also make sure it's a separate application, because sometimes, again, the merit-based applications is a separate essay or certain separate application or something else you have to do. And sometimes the merit-based ones have a different deadline. So a lot of the universities that have the big scholarships, like the Presidential Scholarship and everything, Jefferson Scholarship at University of Virginia, their scholarship is due, their scholarship application and the university application is due on December 1st, which is before the regular deadline. So you have to make sure you're paying attention to deadlines, not only for the application, but for the scholarships. And be realistic about the competition. A lot of the schools that are considered need-blind schools and that say they meet full need are the schools that are really hard to get into. So are you that 4% of the 30,000 applications that are going to be admitted that year. If you are, the good news is they'll fund you up to what they perceive you need. The bad news is it's 4% of the applications. Okay. Again, important factors, make sure you understand the requirements to keep it subsequent years, and make sure that you know if there's a special deadline. For students that really do absolutely need financial aid, funding, scholarships, early decision is not necessarily a good idea. Early decision is the application where it is binding. You're saying that this is my first choice and I really want to go there, and if accepted, I will go there. Now, if you get accepted there, you should, because of the agreement, withdraw your other applications and accept whatever they have offered you for financial aid. Now, you can, in fact, withdraw the application, but it leaves a bad taste in your mouth, in the university's mouth too, that you have said you wanted to go there, and now you're saying, well, but, you know, if you don't give me enough money, I'm not going to go there. So, really seriously consider the early decision application. Early action, I love it. They're going to react quickly, they're going to let you know quickly, you're going to be able to hold that offer until May and hear from all your other schools. Okay? Again, go where the money is. The most up-to-date information about everything is on the university's website. Don't listen to what happened last year. Schools change their deadlines, they change the forms they're using, they change what the requirements are, so please automatically in August go to the university's website and look at the university's website to see deadlines, forms, everything that you need. Okay, now I'm going to take you through a couple of websites that show you that'll show you how to read what they say. You'll go onto the university website, you'll click on either tuition and fees or funding or something like that, and then go to the international section. Sometimes it's the other way around. You go to the international section and then go to the funding. But there's a specific thing for the universities. Now this one is kind of hard to read because it's a little dark, but this is the Duke University website. And it says, we'll meet full demonstrated financial need for a limited number of international students. They're telling you in the first sentence, they have financial aid, but it's limited. They will say there are 2 applicant pools for foreign nationals. Those that need financial aid and those that don't. So when you start asking the question, if I'm asking for financial aid, will it affect my admissions? It will here. Okay? Some schools will say something that also foreign citizens who do not apply for financial aid initially may not subsequently apply. In other words, you can't not apply and then later say, oops, just joking, I need a scholarship now. They don't like that. Okay? But again, they're very, very open about it. And then here's, another link to another part of the website that talks more about that. Keeping in mind that they want qualified students. They want to be able to fund qualified students. But they have a limited pot of gold. And when that pot of gold's gone, it's gone. So they have to decide, are they going to fully fund 20 students? Are they going to partially fund 40 students? You see how it plays out. So how's that money going to go? Now this is one for, let me see who it is, Denver, University of Denver. And they say, what scholarships are available for international students? Please refer to our scholarship page. Basically, all of their scholarships are available for international students. Do they offer full tuition scholarships for international students? Does not offer any full tuition scholarships, but they do have a lot of scholarships. How do I apply? All undergraduate applicants are automatically considered for merit-based. Okay? They're telling you there's no more applications. They want to make it clear because they want you to know what is expected of you. Okay? Another one, this one is Vanderbilt. And they're saying very early, you need to do the College Board Financial Aid profile, the CSS profile. They are need aware for international citizens. and that international freshmen are eligible to apply for all of their merit-based. This is need-based. This is merit-based. And to be considered for the merit-based scholarship, they must complete the appropriate applications. Need-based is limited. Merit-based, they're able to apply. Two different categories. Okay? If at any point you're reading this and you don't understand, go to your counselor and ask, what does this mean? If we don't know and we can't read it, we'll contact the school and say, this isn't clear. We're good at telling them it's not clear. Okay, here's University of Cincinnati. It's one of the schools that has a really, really strong co-op program. In fact, the co-op program that everybody knows at Northeastern was started after this one. So this is one of the first ones, if not the first one. And it talks about what they are able to do. The cooperative education, they can earn up to $40,000 a year as a co-op student. I'd go do that. You're studying and you're working. Again, and it is available for international students. They also have a global scholarship between $1,000 and $25,000 open to qualifying students, international students. So they have two different things going on for international students. Okay? Now, again, here's one. This is, St. Scholastica. And they have 10 special scholarships for international students that, and they are up to 50%, I think it is. 50% tuition. They're looking to bring in more international students. So again, it's very easy. And for us in the international schools, often we can contact Thomas and say, Tom, you've got a really good student, would love to come to the U.S. and study. Can you help us out? And they're very good at it. Facts of life. Talk with the students about how much you're able to afford, and make sure that throughout the process you're looking for schools that are financially safe. Along with being academically safe, you're going to be able to get in, you're also going to be able to pay. If there's an appeal, oh come on, you can do 2. Maybe tomorrow. Trust me, he'll go for 5. Okay. Looking at all the financing options. Also look in your company. Sometimes companies have their own scholarships. I know the kids always say, oh, yeah, Dad's company has a scholarship, but it's only $5,000. The kids are saying only $5,000. The parents are going, yes, $5,000 helps. So ask your HR if there is any scholarships available. Sometimes your home government will do some funding of international students because they want the expertise to be able to bring it back. A lot of the Northern European countries for many years would fund kids to go to the U.S. because they didn't have the majors at their university and they wanted them to come back with those degrees. Again, financial safety school is one that the parents would be able to afford with relatively little financial aid, and one that the students will get an offer at and that the student is willing to attend. Financially safe schools. Now, this is very blurry. You'll be, and I apologize, but this is kind of to show you, looking at certain parts of the U.S. also impacts it. If you look down here at private, not-for-profit schools, and you're looking at the cost of attendance, this is the tuition, and this is sort of room and board. The orange is room and board. New England. Where do most of our kids apply?
Boston.
Boston, the most expensive place to go to university. You know, this year we had quite a few applying to the Southwest, which was good, and sometimes to the Southeast. But again, if you look just by region, why does it cost so much in New England? It costs a lot to live there. So it costs a lot to maintain a university there. It costs a lot to pay a professor to live there. It costs a lot to buy peanut butter there. Everything costs a lot there. So it costs more to have a college there. Now, a couple of slides, the next couple of slides, this is kind of interesting. This is tuition by state at public institutions. Now, we have a lot of our kids that look at public institutions, University of whatever state. Now, if you look at this, when I send this, you'll be able to see these a little bit better. The blue is what's called in-state tuition. The orange on top is out-of-state tuition. So if you're looking at 20,000, there are a lot of places for your tuition you can stay under or pretty close to 20,000. What happens over here? It's a little unruly, right? There are some states that their what's called flagship institution, their primary institution at that state, cost more than private schools. University of Michigan, their tuition is higher than most private schools. There's your in-state. The out-of-state is twice as much. California, my California one. Here, almost the same thing. The flagship institute, the primary institution, Minnesota, University of Minnesota. If you look at Minnesota, where is it? I found it. Minnesota, here it is. It's relatively high for the in-state, but it's not that much higher to be an out-of-state student there. You're coming in under $30,000 for the tuition as an out-of-state student versus nearly $50,000. Again, looking at where you're going. Yes, over here you've got South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, New Mexico. You've got some great schools in New Mexico. You got all kinds of good schools that are not that expensive. My home state, where's my home state? Tennessee gets up right about 20,000, 30,000 as out of state. Can't read the lines. Again, looking very carefully at where you're going. Now, the other key is, a lot of times the state universities are not going to have as much funding for international students, but not always. Junior year, you should be talking to every university coming and finding out what kind of funding they had. Some of you have been, some of you haven't. Do well academically. Remember the deadlines. Make sure you're looking at the websites for the most current information. And again, the question to ask is, do you have financial assistance or funding? Don't say financial aid, because that throws them into thinking about need-based, and they may not have need-based. You want to look and ask them what forms are required and what are the deadlines and how competitive are the scholarships. Yeah.
Just to interject, like a lot of the schools change their funding sources every year. We had several schools who visited our campus, and they were talking about how they increased funding for international students and stuff like that. But it wasn't the same case the year before. So we annoy you guys about going into the visits, because if money isn't going to be an issue, you have to talk to these schools. They only the ones who know what's going on with their structure for that year.
Okay. Where do you find this information out? This is always the key. Where's the money? Now, the College Board website, Big Future. If you get into the college search and you look into one of the profiles of the college on there and go to the international students, it will tell you whether they are funding them by need-based or non-need-based. This one doesn't say that. They say they have 105 students that have received aid, and then they give you the total amount awarded. So just a rough estimate, that means that of those 105, the average award was $32,000. And Ithaca came through with a couple of big awards for our kids this year. Okay? Again, looking at where it's available. Oops. There's a couple of websites that I've included that are ways to look. I haven't had a whole lot of success in that. I think again that most of the stuff is coming in through the universities, but it's certainly, if you got time on a rainy afternoon, you want to look, they're there. Yeah. Now I have 3 different lists I've included, and this is called Doug's list because it was made by a guy named Doug Thompson, who was a long-time university admissions person, and he would go through and he would gather information. And if you look at the very top one, you'll look at Agnes Scott, which is a women's college in Atlanta. They have 80 students enrolled. The cost to attend was $44,000. They funded 80 students, and the average award was $19,000. So they funded almost half of all their international students. If you look further down, you'll see one like, here is Brown. 660 international students. Only 188 were funded. Big drop. What's that, about third, fourth, something like that? Big funding, but not that many of them. Again, looking at Boston U, that's what I was looking for. Nearly 2,000 students. 110 funded.
10%.
Huh?
10%.
Yeah. And they have some big scholarships, and our kids have been known to get them, but they're very competitive. Very competitive.
8 of those schools visited us this year.
Oh yeah. Of this list right here, 8 of them have been on our campus. Did you guys talk to all of them? Okay. Now, this is a bigger list, and it's more in depth, and it's smaller to read. But again, it goes to 81 international students, 79 were funded, and the average was 47,000. Why aren't all of my kids that need international financial aid applying there? It's a great school, Providence College in Rhode Island, right up there in the New England area. You'll see by this one actually goes through and says 100%, 25%, 5%. Remember that one? Michigan State, 5% of their international students receive funding, and 5%, and their average award is $19,000 in Michigan, where it's $47,000 a year for tuition only. Okay, so keep in mind, there's ways, and I'll give you this in the form of an Excel sheet that you can kind of munch around. Okay, the next one is, again, another very similar one, and again, it's doing the same type of thing. It's telling you how many students are receiving aid and what percentage. One thing I want to show you is the California schools. University of California, Los Angeles, all of our kids want to go there. 37,000 students, international students. 74 receive funding. 2% of the international students receive funding. If you need financial aid, is that a good place to be applying? Probably not. Right across town, you see Riverside. 476, 344 received it, and 32,000 is the average, so 72% of them. Same system, the University of California system, but one campus has more funding for international students because they want more international students on their campus. Okay? Again, and I just whacked a couple. Santa Cruz, 83% of their kids get funding, but not that much, 11,000. See how to read the forms so you can get some ideas? So what you should be doing is when Ms. McDade puts up what schools are coming, you need to grab this form and say, are they funding international students? Yes, they are. I want to go make friends with that rep. I want them to know me, and I want them to admit me, and I want them to go to bat for me for funding. Last year I put a bunch of kids on the spot because we had some universities there that week. 4 universities, and we had very few kids come in. And all 4 of those universities were universities that did a lot of funding. And I asked the kids, did you go to any of those? Oh, I had to do this, and I had to do this, and I had to do this. The reps are the ones that are the key players in the admissions and in some cases the financial aid. Now, a comparison sheet, again, it has to do with looking and seeing if you're comparing apples to apples as opposed to apples to cranberry sauce. Okay? So you want to make sure that you're putting everything in. The tuition, the room, the board, the insurance, and all the other direct costs, the indirect costs, when they're doing their cost of attendance, are they considering all of these things? So the total cost of the education at this particular school is this. And then you go and you say, okay, how much do I have in grants, funding, scholarships, and other loans, work study, and then how much out of pocket? There's another line down here. I got cut off, sorry. There's another line where you take this from this and you have how much is going to come out of your pocket? What's the gap? What's the gap? Okay? Now, there's some cool things in some of the state schools where there are waivers of state tuition. For Wisconsin, for example, except for Madison, which is their main campus, most of the Wisconsin campuses will waive the out-of-state tuition. So you come in as in-state tuition. Several years ago, I had a student go in and study at Superior, and he was paying less than $15,000 a year for everything. Because the tuition was low, the housing and room and board was low there, and he was able to go through for a very economical. University of Texas Arlington was just here. That is a great place for engineering. It's one of the UT system's primary engineering. They waive the tuition for freshmen. The tuition, out-of-state tuition. You're paying in-state in-state Texas fees as a first-year student. Now, the main campus, UT Austin, if you are there and you do well your first year, sometimes they will waive it for your second year, but there's not a guarantee. The Arlington rep said, we start from the beginning. Again, some of the other ones, Minnesota, not the Twin Cities campus, but the other campuses. And again, your degree is going to say University of Minnesota or Minnesota State University, whichever one you're going to. It's going to be the same degree. Again, some of the North Dakota ones, Wisconsin, different ones and everything. And I did a funny thing. I Googled one time. I said schools for low out-of-state tuition. In other words, the tuition in general. I didn't ask about international, just low out-of-state tuition. And these came out with out-of-state tuition being less than $10,000. And there's some of them. Here's the University of Texas, one of their campuses. Tuition is less than $10,000. A Minnesota school, less than $10,000. St. Cloud State is in that also. It's got some great programs up there. But again, you can find a reasonably priced university. They are not all, we were talking about this afternoon. What do you hear about? You hear about the 15 schools that have less than 10% acceptance rate. There's a big bubble and huff and puff about that. You hear about the 20 schools that cost over $70,000. Big huff and puff. There are 4,000 schools in the U.S. Most of them are not in that range. And you can get an excellent education at the schools that are moderately priced and that are not so selective that you're not going to get in. Okay? We want that combination. Admissions and affordability. Also, there's, for those of you that are athletes, there's sports scholarships, and again, it's NCAA and NAIA, and we can help you with that. But best advice, it's the only advice, if funding is necessary, go where they're saying they're offering the funding. Okay? Now, I'll load this up onto the digest this week for you. And if you click on any of these, it will show you the different charts. I'm pointing on this like you can see me pointing at the screen. It'll show you the charts. It'll show you the awards comparison. It'll show you the sample bank letter, because some universities will ask for a bank letter to verify your finances. And I've got a copy of what it looks like in here. But also there's one online. And again, some applications that are here. Okay? Now, questions? She's staring at me and smiling, so this is good. Again, a lot of it's the research now, doing the research ahead of time. So again, that you get the schools that are offering the money, that get the schools that you're going to be accepted at, and get the schools that have the major you want to study, and working all of that together. It's a big puzzle. But that's why we're wanting to do, I used to do this in the fall, and I realized that was stupid. I need to do it in the spring when you're looking at stuff, right? I'm trying to get these out so I can give them to you. This is, some of the stuff that's available online. So. But again, a lot of it has to do with trying to, here we go. Yep, here we go. I'm not doing this very efficiently. It has to do with what your needs are and talking with your kids about what honestly is going to be, what's the affordability. Questions, anybody? She's thinking of one. She wants to ask me a hard question too.
Yeah, I guess my concern is the financial aid where it's merit-based versus need-based. Is there much difference in terms of, like, do you need to specify?
The university's going to specify what they've got.
Do they not have, does it, some universities have both?
No. Some have both, not all do. Like we had some big name schools here the other night with Columbia, UPenn, and Yale. They have no merit-based at all. They have no sports, they have no merit-based. They figure all their kids are talented, so that's not a way to divide it. Theirs is only need-based. But then there's other places that may have a combination that will use some that's need-based and some that's merit-based to appeal to some of the kids and get some kids to come in. And also, some of them would be purely merit-based. They don't have any needs. So.
But will revealing that you have a need-based, you need a financial aid, would that lower the chances of getting it?
Depends on the university. But the university is going to be very clear about that. They're going to tell you that they're need aware or that they're need blind or anything like that. Or they'll say they have no need-based money. And if it's no need-based money, then it's not going to make a difference.
That was like the example with Duke University.
Yeah.
I'll be pretty upfront about that. So at that, they put you in a separate pool if you do have need-based aid, or if you are applying for need-based aid, they'll put you in a separate pool. So with that,
But it's for all years or just for the first year and every year they're
Well, need-based money, you will often have to apply every year or have to
Every
do
year.
something to
Yeah.
prove that you still need it.
And what happens if it's, let's say, the first year is not need money, you can pay for the first year, and the second year
Usually they don't,
From the beginning.
yeah, from the
Yeah.
beginning.
From the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah,
must
so
to
from-
specify for the beginning. If
Yeah.
something change on the way,
Then that's a conversation with the I know years and years ago, this is, back when I was young and had no gray hair, there was a financial crisis in the country I was in. So there were a lot of kids that were in university and suddenly they had a huge devaluation of the currency. Parents weren't able to get the currency out and all of that. And many universities stepped up and helped the
happened in
students that were
2009?
there. They helped the students who were already there. But they did not admit new students saying, we're going to fund you all 4 years. If you were already there, they would help you. But again, that's the exception to the rule. Most of the time, whatever you're admitted on, that's probably what's going to be the 4 years.
They expect families to be, they will require proof of you being able to pay for the year, right, but in order to qualify for that visa. Right, but when you're expecting to apply to the university and indicate when you're applying for financial aid, they're not just talking about the first year. They expect you to plan for the 4 years. Right, so it's something to keep in mind. And typically, if a student doesn't qualify for aid the first year, it's unethical to say, well, I can pay for 1 year and I'm just going to apply for financial aid in subsequent years. Right? Like that's an exceptional situation that they have to try to figure that out for. I had friends, in the GFC in 2009, like we were talking about, domestic students, but they had to change their plans when they were in the middle of the universities, and their parents might have lost their jobs, or situations like that. So it's,
something can happen during the way.
yeah, something. In those,
And again, parents lose their jobs or you move from here to somewhere else and you move back home and it's talking to the university financial aid offices one-to-one at that. But I wouldn't say, without fail, yes, they'll step up and give you funding because
You must specify, just think what should happen in the future.
And it does take being a constant person in their office and not like your father, but advocating for yourself through the process. Great example, I had a student who did not qualify for any aid, although her family had a couple of kids already in school, and the family was pretty tapped out. And the dad allowed her to go to this school and took out a parent loan for her to go that first year. But she got on campus, and not only did she rock it as a student, but she also really got to know the financial aid person every, like she made it a point to make sure they saw her face and saw how much she struggled and how much she worked to try to get through that education. And started, and then the family also had some changes too, so they could update their FAFSA and stuff like that. But you can't, now is the time not to be quiet, but to advocate.
Typically with merit-based aid, the more a student stands out as an academic, and the more likely their chances are for being offered merit-based aid, because they seem like a desirable candidates at universities that want them to be there.
An engaged student, not pure academics,
Yeah.
an engaged student.
I
I
mean,
mean, there's some schools that will send out information. I know Tulane has a big one for service. And so the kids here that do a lot of service. It's a great one to, I know Ms. Russell always hangs it up on her board and everything. It's a great one to be able to say, I like service and I want to do it in college, and here's one that's going to help me fund myself going to college.
There's other schools who do it for performance.
Mhm.
If you're willing to play in the school band, you don't have to be a music major, but they'll give you a music performance as scholarship, to supplement the scholarship to help. That's where making sure your application's detailed, go over it with your counselor, go over it as a family, and have those conversations about the things that we do want to continue on to Ross University.
So how do you find out schools that offer things like that?
You have to research, and
And
that's
it's
those
research
questions.
find a school that they're interested in. Right now, they should be coming to us with their list of schools, and we're going over them with a fine-tooth comb and looking at things that are important to them. And if we're looking at it and saying, okay, here's, if you're needing financial aid, the next step will be, what are they offering and how are they distributing their money? There are other ways to get scholarships for international students, but I will say truthfully, it has mostly come from the university itself. And again, getting out of the mainstream, getting off of the East Coast and the West Coast. Go where they're not overwhelmed with international students.
And highly ranked.
And they can still be very highly ranked and just don't happen to be in Boston, New York, and LA. And they want the international students, and they value the international students, and they want to make sure that you are a valued part of their campus. And that's hard because the kids are so afraid that they're going to not be in a in a city of 10 million, and they're not going to be entertained. But trust me, and I was telling Mr. Abraham, I was in a school of 4,000 in a town of 4,000, and trust me, there was plenty going on to keep me from doing my homework. So you don't have to be in a big school in a big city. You have to be where your major is and where there's people that value you for whatever you're going to be doing.
Non-disruption.
Mm-hmm.
Non-disruption.
No disruptions, yeah. Well, I was telling some of the kids, my school, we had first run movies for free on campus because, the theater there was a little slow on getting things downtown, but we would get them on campus for free. Whereas the kids that were in the cities were having to pay large money to go. I mean, how much does it cost to go to a movie in New York now? $25? And you go to some of the schools that are outside of New York, and they're getting this, you're a student free. And again, those things mount up. All that kind of stuff mounts up. But again, I'll put this on the digest this week, and you can download the stuff. As you're going through it, if you have questions, please come and see your counselor. Any of us can answer the questions. And if you see something on a website you don't understand, come and let us know. And if we don't understand it, we will write to them. We are not shy at all. At all. And
That's good.
We know.
but that's the main thing. Or you write yourself. That's sometimes establishing that connection early is good. All right? You ready? Yeah. Come on. 2 Durham. You can give her 2 Durham.
Too early though.
Too early? Okay.
Choose. Start the counting.
Okay. If there's no other questions, I'll set you free to go have dinner.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, very much for all the time. Thank you.
No problem.
Got more questions.
Yeah. But that's okay. Questions are good. Questions at this stage is really, really good. So the more questions you have, the better off.
Yeah, we got time.
You're prepping for
Okay.
this.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Okay, that's okay.
Yeah.
You can't come tomorrow? Okay, tomorrow afternoon though?
So actually,
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go over the ones we've already gone over. Okay. So you're gonna look at the website, right?
I'll prepare for my test.
Yeah.
Yeah, prepare for your test first, okay? Bye-bye, thank you.
actually, no,
You should be better to do that. Not to think about that, especially in today's world. Most of the time, you'll be teaching financial. So if you know that there's financial limitations, and you come to the school, you say no matter what, if you accept me, I'm going to go there, no matter how expensive you know, or how much money I'm leaving on the table from another school. And that's conflicting ideologies right there.
You're getting a really, really good undergraduate education now. Most colleges, Washington have done plenty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A smaller setting and it's more, hands-on, rich with the instruction stuff, and then boom, off to a great graduate school.
Yeah.
There is more funding.
Yeah.
But what if it's
Now, that's a different case, because that's not coming from, money's not coming from NYU, it's coming from the government here.
Yeah.
But it's great, it's great.
So they do. You should.
Sorry. No, Tom. Sorry, I'm out of
Pressing
practice.
away.
Yeah, I'm out of practice, sorry.
She lived there for a while.
Well, it was in Malaysia and in
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, so in that case, we didn't need to understand to put more.
All right, guys.
Have a
Bye,
lovely
Jenny.
evening.
Thank
NYU,
you.
probably yes. NYU opted out.
Yeah. And it's what, with that, because they do shaft students with NYU up down, that's a special situation where they show that whatever your demonstrated financial need is, you're going to meet that. And that would make sense, provided it lines up with everything Zelia wants, right, in terms of being able to study music and economics, right? That would be the one exception to that, right? But like when if you're at, I wouldn't apply, if there's financial considerations, I wouldn't apply to any place or the decision that doesn't guarantee that, right?
I mean, they say that the same funding will happen for early decision as it does for regular decision. But the problem is you never get to see the other offers.
Yeah,
That's the sort of sticking point.
Yeah.
And you never know how much financial aid you will be getting. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So which means that they can just give you 20% versus, and then you're leaving a bigger one
Yeah.
out.
Now, NYU opted out is very good about giving that award right there.
Yeah, at the time of
They're very
the
good,
admissions
very
decision,
good.
a lot of times I'll do that.
Because
So,
I've also read that in Shanghai also offers.
yeah, NYU Shanghai does also.
But not as much, not quite as robust.
Yeah. So there's a few universities that will offer, that will, they call it like gapping students, where they look at that expected family contribution and that's, if there's a demonstrated need between the cost of attendance and what a student's family can afford, they're committed to funding that, if that student is admitted, right? But many of those universities are also need aware at admissions, like Duke, they know that not only are you competing for a spot, but you're competing for a funded spot too. Right? So I mean, if there's a school that Zelia and you guys are set on, where you know, like, okay, if we get into this school, we know that they'll meet 100% of the demonstrated need that we have, then, and it offers a program that she's interested in, then you can go for that, right? The other schools that you're applying to, make sure that if you're rely on a mix of merit-based and financial aid. You need to find out if they're offering financial aid for international students. And if you're looking at merit-based aid, making sure that's a place where she can stick out, and looking at that admissions criteria, looking at the 50 and making sure that she is well above that, and then even with with the talent too, being able to submit that portfolio. So I was looking at I had her in mind for a few schools that she, I know Vassar's another place where they meet 100% of demonstrated need, and that's very selective, but a large college with open curriculum. So it is a place where they're saying that students can design their own curriculum so that she can major in music and study economics at the same time, right? But they also do that at Marist. They don't offer need-based financial aid. They do offer merit-based scholarships. Typically on the upper end of their total, it will be like on the upper end of their generous scholarships, it's looking like almost $30,000. The total cost of attendance per year is roughly $58,000. So there's still that, yeah. But they offer a music minor and a strong business program. Marist College, and Marist College is in Poughkeepsie, New York. Actually, the same town as Vassar. Right? And then there's also the SUNY New Pulse. Yeah, that's one of the ones I went to also, where that is a more affordable total cost of attendance, and there might be opportunities for sticking out and having scholarships as well. But they offer music and business as well there. But then there's so then there's a few, but it's definitely doing like that research. I think I sent Azalea a list of schools.
Can't see them.
Yeah, I sent her a list of schools and to look at, because we were talking about that, we were discussing that together, actually, the three of us, that like what are some schools where it wouldn't be conservatory because you don't have time to study anything else, right? But they would have a program that allows her to study piano cello and do economics, and we came up with this.
Look at Tulsa.
Yeah, University of Tulsa. But typically, like I was saying, many of the private universities are going to be the ones that are more generous with merit-based aid, especially.
So which one is much more easy to get in the financial the merit-based or
Depends on the school.
Yeah,
Exactly.
there's not a.
It's not a
difficult with each
formula. It's
one.
not this versus
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Every 4,000 schools and 4,000 different ways to do it.
I mean, what I would do is, because she has a very specific thing she wants to study, right? She wants to study music and economics, right? So what I would do is look at the schools. I think I sent her a list of like 10 different schools like that. I'm giving you 3 more now. Look at those schools, and then look at what their financial aid policies are for international students, and looking at their total cost of attendance to be able to see that, and being able to look at, all right, this is off the table because this isn't realistic, because they say they don't offer any financial aid and any need-based financial aid, and looking at their academic profile of students who are admitted and looking at where you're at right now, if you don't stand out strong enough, then their likelihood of getting merit-based aid isn't high, right? So I mean, but looking at, I'll start with that list, knowing that like these are things that she wants to study, right? Because there's no point in going to a place where will offer you aid, but you can't study music here. Because that's clear that's something she wants to do, right?
Another question is that there's a student question.
Yeah.
And that there's no opportunity to do it in business classes.
I don't, at Berkeley, do they have a possibility of studying business or economics?
Music management, music business kind of thing.
Yeah,
It's not,
it would be
it's
very
not
like
a
specific to
general.
music pertaining
Yeah,
to that.
very specific.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then like my brother went to Tri-State for engineering, but like halfway through, he got a scholarship for soccer because he was teaching soccer. Like I think similar to what she mentioned about, oh, if you are willing to do music or whatever, then they will also.
But you can't count on that. That's not something you
Yeah,
can
that's
count
something
on.
that's really.
You know,
how
that-
do you find out which colleges actually?
There's no way to find that out because
Yeah.
he just happened to be there and they needed somebody for soccer. That's it, you know?
Yeah.
That was, you know, the stars aligned. That
Yeah.
has nothing to do with being able to
Yeah,
research
that's why,
that.
because we didn't even know that existed.
Yeah.
And it was just offered.
Yeah. Yeah, it's difficult to tell.
You need to go in looking at what they say they offer and how they offer it and go from there. The one-offs of the changes are really,
You can't
really
bank
rare.
on that, yeah.
Really.
I mean, one of the ones that she was mentioning, the performance scholarship, they have a really, a huge, sufficient, a significant performance scholarship at University of Laverne. The one I was mentioning to you, that's in Laverne, California. That's about 30 minutes east of LA, right? And that's also a smaller liberal arts community where she has that opportunity to study music and flexibility to studying economics as well. So there's a few that are there. I mean, there's there's schools like Vassar, they are committed to being 100% of that financial need. Or if you see schools that are like that, and say that, then you could look at that, and provided that they have what she needs, and you can apply their early decision. But you know, there's quite a bit of research that has to be done to make sure that's exactly like the number one. You know, the Vassar is very selective to get into. It's about a 20% admit rate. So you want to make that early decision. It increases chances for a student, but they have to be on the cusp of like the standards for admission to, you know. So I mean, if looking at that, you see, it's pretty essential. So I hope this helps. I know like sometimes you have questions and you leave with more questions, but it's good because it gives you more specific direction in what you
Yes,
research
with
too.
the research,
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I was able to also like fine tune on that worry I had.
Yeah.
So when I went to ask Yale about
Mhm.
because they've got really good music school, but
Mhm.
apparently the school of music is only for grad.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So when
Their
you're
graduate
at Yale,
school
you
is
just apply
super
to-
competitive.
Yeah.
But it's all free, right, for the grad.
Yeah.
Once you get into the music school, that's similar to like Curtis.
Okay.
You don't pay anything, but that's super competitive.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Welcome.
thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you so
thanks
much
for
for
coming,
everything.
yeah.
Have a
Take
good
it as
evening.
Azalea for that list though.
Yeah.
You sent that
Yeah.
about probably a month back, I think, after our meeting, but thanks so much. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
She's gonna drive Okay.
Good? Sorry.
Yep.
So we used to have this presentation in the fall, but you know we wanted to have it in the spring so that juniors who are devising their list could take this information into account. All right. So this is information that was put out by a survey from the College Board. And you can see this, right? And so I think that the vast majority of the parents and families, they recognize that college, higher education is an investment, and they're willing to support it. Less than 40% of families plan for all 4 years before they start. Right? Because you're talking about sometimes in some cases this is $325,000 that you gotta save up for. That being said, less than 2% of U.S. citizens pay full sticker price. So what does that mean, full sticker price? Is that the total cost of attendance for it, when you look at everything, tuition, room and board, books, insurance, it'll be upwards of $70,000 a year. If you look at how many students actually pay that full cost of attendance, it is less than 2% of the U.S. citizens that pay that. If you're looking at all the institutions across the board, whether it's public or private, okay? So that's something to keep in mind, all right? And that's something to keep in mind, like in terms of not letting that sticker price scare you away where you automatically write that off.
Okay, let me say something real quick. We'll post this in the digest, this presentation, so don't worry about trying to remember it or take notes and everything. We'll post the whole thing for you so that you can go back and refer to it. Go ahead.
Yep. So when you're looking at, you'll hear this term, EFC. Right? So this is an expected family contribution. And if you're a U.S. citizen, you will have the opportunity to apply for a need-based aid through a couple different mechanisms, right? And this is a way they determine. This is one strong part of that calculation of what financial aid you might have available through need-based aid. All right. So this is a measure of not just the number that you have in the bank, right, but a measure that the university determines your capacity over time to pay for that cost, right? So it's not just a dollar amount from your savings account. They're looking at multiple things happening, right? So how many dependents you have, how many students you might have in college, the number of providers in the family, the oldest parent, so that takes into account because how many more years that person is working to be able to provide and afford the family, okay? Special circumstances, so like loss of property or loss of a job, health-related expenses, that gets taken into account too. So when you fill out one of the forms, is the CSS profile that universities commonly ask you to fill out, it's a pain to fill out. It's really comprehensive, but this is a way that they can most accurately assess a student's expected family contribution to their cost, right? Cost of attendance, COAs, this is another term that you'll hear. So this is everything all up in terms of that sticker price, what you'll see. This is tuition, room and board, so how much it costs to live on campus or live off campus, and it might help you calculate housing and food. Things that are also in there, insurance, books, and transportation. That would be considered under that total cost of attendance. Right? So it's really important when you're looking at that and you're doing your research, that you're not just thinking like that's tuition, and this is what it is. You want to look at the including room and board as well. Right? So what's important, this is kind of small to look at, but this is a breakdown of 2-year, 4-year public and 4-year private universities. And how it's paid for. So the first part in green are grants and scholarships. So what you'll notice is that in 4-year private universities, that typically comprises a larger portion for how that's paid for. So typically, the 4-year private universities will have that bigger sticker price, right? That higher total cost of attendance. They tend to be more generous in terms of grants and scholarships. Right? So that's something to keep in mind as you're doing your research about that. Right? The next biggest portion that's kind of common across the board is that parent income and savings. Sorry, but that's something to keep in mind. Okay. You look at the big thing that's scary that people talk about in terms of on the news and everything. What do you hear is like the crippling thing about financing college in America. What do you hear? Yeah, student loans, all right? And it's obviously it's a very real thing, but looking at the statistics about this, the majority of how it's funded, right, where you see this is student borrowing and the parent borrowing. Yeah, that's not, you hear about that because it's highly publicized, but when you look at the percentage of families who borrowed, it's not the majority of it, right? So, and especially it's typically in about 10% of families, both the student and parent borrow for loans, all right, took out loans to pay for that. All right, this is in 2015, 2016. So, this is it's something to keep in mind here that when you're looking at this, and knowing that in today's day and age, an undergrad degree gets you something, but you still have to go further, right? Like, how much are you wanting? You don't want to leave your undergrad experience with crippling loans when you know that most likely you're going to have to pay for something else. So having this conversation about what's realistic in terms of what can be paid for, it has to be something that you take into consideration, right? Okay, again, going along this same part, 73% of students didn't take out loans, right? So the majority, while you hear this is like a big issue about paying loans back, I think the majority of people don't take out loans. And that could be attributed to being able to find schools that are more affordable and relying on those the merit-based aid as well, right? And financial aid for that in general. So when you talk about types of financial aid, there's gift aid. So all these on the left, these are the ones we like, right? So you're talking about grants or scholarships, which are merit-based, right? And then need-based aid. The big thing about this is there's no repayment required on this, right? These are the things that we like, obviously. The self-help, so this would be under loans and work study. Work study isn't terrible, but it's where you might qualify for a job on campus, like working in the library, working in the rec center, and they
In the cafeteria.
yeah, all right, and they help pay for the tuition with that, right? But then you don't owe that money back if you might qualify for that work study in that part. All right, loans. There's two types of loans. There's subsidized loans and unsubsidized loans. So subsidized loans are loans that are at a lower interest rate generally, and that interest kicks in after you graduate or after you stop going to school. Right? Unsubsidized loans, typically the loan's interest is higher, and it picks up from the time that you take those loans out. Right? So then when you get that financial aid package from a university and they break that down, that's something to keep in mind, right? About where that money's coming from and how that's broken down. All right, so for U.S. citizens and permanent residents, these are different ways that financial aid could come through. So federal funding, and this is why you would fill out the FAFSA. That's coming from the federal government, right? There's state funding. Institutional refers to that university that might be providing it out of its endowment or its own funds. Private third-party organizations might be community organizations, foundations like IBM or Bill Gates is that they might have private scholarships that you could apply for that are separate from the university.
Your own company
Yeah.
may have them available. You want to always ask your HR office if there's anything available for funding university studies.
And when I was applying to college or when I was going to college, I think I qualified one through like my park district, right? And they had one that was a community-based scholarship, right? So those private ones, that's what that refers to as third party. The majority of our students, when we were calculating the results from the seniors of what they got admitted to and financial aid that they were offered, it came from institutional and merit-based aid, right? And that was a significant percentage of that. So far, yeah. And it's something, what was it up to?
We're close to $3 million.
Yeah. We don't have everybody's come in yet, so I think this is a big portion of the institutional aid. Okay, so one thing that each university has been required in the U.S. to provide is a net price calculator. Okay, and you can find this on their webpage actually. So they could help get families and students to have a more realistic idea of what aid they might qualify for and what's left on the table that they have to find a way to pay for. Okay. Basically what you do is you enter in financial information about your family, so the student can't do this alone. Your mom and dad, you got to help them out with this. And that will help them figure out what would be paid. And this is this is based on the history of students that attended there in the past, right? So that's how they kind of help calculate that for you, right? But they made this the law for universities to have these up on their websites. To
Some
make sure.
universities, they're better than others.
Yeah.
So if you get one and it gets real complicated or get messy and you don't understand what they're saying, just go to another university and see what they're saying. They're going to be very similar outputs or outcomes, I should say.
At least, especially in determining that first part, the EFC. It should be similar, like going from place to place, right? Okay, so going over the different types of financial aid. Need-based aid, okay, so this is based off your family's EFC, right, in terms of what that university is willing to provide, in terms of the gap. They determine your expected family contribution, and they look at the total cost of attendance to see how that gap could be closed, right? So the eligibility of need-based aid might vary according to college, according to total cost of attendance, the availability of funding. Some universities have a huge endowment fund where they could say that we commit to being able to gap students. If you've heard that word, they'll meet 100% of the demonstrated need of that family. So whatever that EFC is, whatever that total cost of attendance, that university might be able to fully commit to funding that, right? Other universities, they might not have that, okay? So they'll say, like, we can pick some of that up in institutional aid, right? But the rest of that, you're gonna have to rely on other sources to be able to fund that, whether that's loans or third-party scholarships, right? But in this situation, the college calculates your EFC, and they award based on the level of need and available aid funding, right? So this is calculated by the college. Right? That's important to recognize. Okay, merit-based aid. So this could be this is based on not finances of the family. So either academic talent through sports or artistic. If there's a high priority for somebody that's playing music and they need a first violinist in their band that year, in their orchestra, or some other special characteristic, you know, these are examples of merit-based aid. So that they don't take into account financial situations in the family whatsoever to calculate this, right? Typically, if you're looking at academics, the likelihood of getting merit-based aid at an institution increases as you stand out as a candidate when you're applying there, right? So when you're looking at your target schools and your safety schools, finances are something that you want to keep in mind. I think that's something that you should look at, because not only are you likely to get in, but it increases your chances of maybe qualifying for some merit-based aid. Okay, so looking at the regions of the U.S., okay, you'll find that the highest, the most expensive one is New England. Okay.
And where do our kids apply?
Yeah, and the majority of our kids apply, regardless of whether they're from there or not, end up applying to Boston, right? To Boston, that area. Where you compare that to other places like the Midwest or the South and Southwest, it ends up being not as expensive. Still up there though, you know. So if you're looking at costs, this is something to keep in mind, you know. And then
If you're not with state, not looking at state,
Yeah.
you're going to have, you know, in-state tuition and everything, and you're looking at the whole thing. Look at the whole thing. And it may be more economical for you to move off of the coast and move towards the center, so that you're able to get some of the lower cost and overall cost, and probably more financial aid.
So this is looking at private schools, all right? So these are not publicly funded schools where families can qualify for in-state tuition, or state-funded schools like that. But they're still up there. You're looking at public universities.
Don't panic. We know you can't see the letters on this. When you
Yeah.
look at it on your own screen, you'll be able to see this.
So when you see this, I'll look at, if you can follow the cursor, okay? So what you see here in blue, these are public universities, these are state funded, right? So if you're in the US and you qualify for in-state residency in that state, you qualify for in-state tuition, right? So that's what you see in blue. And this is a tremendous discount all across the board, right? If you look at the out-of-state premium, that's what you see in orange for that total cost. The highest one they got on here is Vermont for the out-of-state. It's at $39,000 a year. All right. Okay. Now keep in mind the one that has one of the cheapest out-of-state is South Dakota. Okay. And that's it.
Go establish residency in South Dakota.
Yeah,
If you
but I mean,
look at it,
this is
even
for out-of-state though.
out-of-state.
Out-of-state is $12,500 there. That's
So
out-of-state
South Dakota
fees
School
over
of
there.
Mines, good state schooling, great engineering school,
Yeah.
12,000 a year.
So you see some big differences here. The cheapest in-state tuition you see is Wyoming here, all the way to the left, Florida. And some of these, the difference between in-state and out-of-state is pretty significant. Like if you look here at Virginia, this is in-state tuition is a little bit over 10. It's about 12 a year. You look at the out-of-state tuition, and that's over 30. There's another one. Michigan is a big difference here.
Could look at the flagship on that.
Yeah, so if you look at Michigan, so the flagship universities at each state, so in Michigan, this would be University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, right? If you look at their costs, it's roughly 15 in-state tuition. This isn't total cost of attendance. This is just tuition. If you look at out-of-state costs at the University of Michigan, that's nearly $48,000 a year. Right, so it's a tremendous difference if you qualify
That's
for
more
that
than
in-state
most
tuition.
private schools.
Yeah, yeah. So again, keeping in mind that sticker price and like all the things that come into play there, right? So if you do qualify for in-state tuition, this differs from place to place. It differs actually not just from place to place in terms of your state. It differs from university to university within the state. So it's really important as you do that research and you're looking at that. I had students that applied this year that they got in-state tuition at University of Arizona Tucson, but they didn't get in-state tuition at ASU in Tempe. You know, so it's important when you're looking at that, if you think you might qualify for that, you contact the university, find out what you need to be able to qualify for that in-state tuition discount for it, right?
This is the tuition in the two columns you want to look at is the middle column and the right-hand column. And it sort of shows you, the right-hand column is, the top is schools that charge over $50,000 for tuition. And the percent of students, overall undergraduate students. So the top one up here on the right, 13% of all of the all of the undergraduate students are in a school that costs that much. But if you look down, there's lots more in schools that cost less. What they're trying to say is, and the reason I'm doing this is because I tried to teach him this slide and it was kind of complicated slide. But there's a lot of kids in a lot of schools that don't cost that much. And over here, we didn't do the one on the two-year schools. In the United States, I forgot the percentage. A huge amount of students start at two-year institutions in their states because the two-year institutions are very, very reasonable. And for many of them, they are linked directly with their public institutions, and they're able to get 2 years of their education out of the way for a very reasonable cost, and then go transfer directly to the flagship universities.
California is an example of where that's really popular.
North Carolina, Florida, Texas.
So they're having consortiums
Ohio,
of community colleges where you can transfer in. Texas is another place, yeah. You know, so that's a really common economical pathway. Yeah.
Without the in-state tuition, is that still possible to make that transfer and have a reasonable price attached to that?
Depends on the state. So I mean, with
You mean
that,
start at a two-year school and then transfer in? Yeah.
yeah, you're talking about and qualify for in-state tuition when you transfer, or
no,
not even
just
that?
as in like the reasonable price situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so that's one thing. There's actually California community colleges that recruit internationally because that's, I mean, when you look at the cost of like UC Berkeley compared to if you look at the cost of community college, that's a significant difference, right? And when you get that diploma at the end of the day, it's not going to say 2 years at Orange Coast Community College and 2 years at UC Berkeley. It shows where you finish, right? And so by doing that, you save like tens of thousands of dollars, you know, so that is a pretty popular pathway doing that. At some universities, in California, they're pretty strict on this, but at some universities, if you go in, it's at a 2-year college and you don't have in-state tuition, by the time you finish, if you establish state residency, you can transfer at in-state tuition rate. Right? Then it
Not
becomes
California.
not California. Texas does this though, right? So like doing this for UT Austin, it's an economical deal for you, right? And that differs from state to state and place to place, but I mean that's something that's an incredible discount right there, you know, especially for being able to have a degree at a flagship institution at the end of those 4 years. Right? Going along with this, you know, you hear, especially with this whole college admission scandals that you hear in the news, and how much money people are willing to fork over for it because they feel it's that cutthroat, and the cost of universities in general. Like that's what you hear. That's the hype of it. You know, with 4,000 higher ed institutions in the U.S., true, there are a lot of them, or there are a number of them that cost as much as $70,000 a year. But what we're finding is there's more and more universities that are becoming more economical and affordable to get into that also still offer.
Not becoming more, they have always been.
Yeah.
It's that, you know, 15 schools that have the admissions rate of less than 10% that we hear about. It's that 20 schools that cost over $70,000 that we hear about. We don't hear about the other 2,000 because we're so caught up in that top slice. The same thing with the loans. These kids that come out with these phenomenal loan debts. That's a slice. That makes news. The other hundreds of thousands of students that are getting a good education for a reasonable price and coming out without a huge debt, you don't hear about them. That's not news. That doesn't sell newspapers or whatever you do with newspapers. but that's the thing. And so what we're trying to do is show that there's lots of places that you can go and get an excellent education without killing your parents' wallets.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a big thing to take away with it. You know, sometimes it's just, you gotta take the blinders off when you're only thinking that you could only apply to certain places, right? So the paper that we were talking about before, when they calculate your EFC, there's the FAFSA and the CSS profile. There's also some institutional applications, so specific to that university, that you might need to fill out. And then the business and farm supplement, that's only if you actually have like a small business.
If you have your own, if you're a business owner,
Yeah.
they'll ask for an additional documentation.
All right, so we're gonna
Small
go.
business and farm, and kids that come saying, my dad's not a farmer. No, but he owns his own business.
Yeah.
Read the first word.
So the first one, this is a common one, and we would say if your child is a U.S. citizen, the one going to college, you should apply for this. All right, there's this big, there's been a myth that we've been hearing from parent populations that I don't want to fill out the FAFSA because if I do, then it's going to hurt my child's chances of getting into school. And if you're a U.S. citizen, that's not the case. That's not true. Right? It's not going to hurt you in any way filling out the FAFSA. So it is important to fill this out. If anything, it helps you because even if you don't qualify for any need-based aid, many times when you're looking for merit-based aid or when you get on campus and you're applying for jobs, they'll ask you if you fill out the FAFSA ahead of time because a lot of those jobs might be related or tied up with work study. Right? So it's a pain to fill out, but it's worth your while being able to fill that out. So it stands for the free application for federal student aid. You want to make sure that you go to the FAFSA.ed.gov website, not FAFSA.com. And this shows you, this is going to be the main form that you'd fill out if you're applying as a U.S. citizen. Okay? They're going to ask for evidence of what your family's expected financial contribution is. The big thing they're going to do is they'll ask for your tax information from the prior year. So if you're looking at go to college in fall of 2020, right, they're going to ask for your 2018 tax return as your most recent evidence of that. The reason why they do this, one of the reasons is because they don't want to they don't want guesswork in it. So you have that. That's going to be your most recent completed tax return on that. You know, and then this kind of standardizes the whole process across the board.
Have any of you had an older child go to college? Okay. Have? Okay, because this changed about 3 years ago. So before, it was the prior year taxes that you had to fill out. And they changed it because they realized the difference between one year and the next for most students was not different. And they were having to wait with and use what was called estimates. And then the estimates were very messy and very inaccurate. So they went to the prior because you've already filled it out. It's already been filed. Yeah.
What if you don't pay taxes?
Okay, you still have to use the documentation based on whatever your parents earned. And so the information still has to go in there based on the 2018 earning year.
That's if you're a U.S. citizen and your parents aren't.
not.
Yeah. So that would be a situation for that. Yeah, so that's the reason why, and part of the reason why they changed that is because about 3 years ago they moved they opened up submission for FAFSA in October as opposed to January, so that way you could have that, you could fill that out ahead of time and get an accurate predictor of your EFC, your expected family contribution, right? This kind of talks about the implications for that change that we were just talking about. So this also allows families to apply earlier, so that you could fill the FAFSA out and submit it, and then still apply and have an idea for the expected financial contribution, and have that calculator for how much you're expected to pay. And this could affect your list, your college list, right? So this could help apply if you want to apply earlier and still have that option, and know that financially that's a good fit for us and we can still apply there. So that's why they opened that up earlier, right? It kind of goes along the details of that.
That's enough detail.
Yeah.
You guys can read that. This is just the rationale of the government. What can I say?
So it's a good thing that they opened it up earlier. It's a good thing that that deadline's earlier. Right? That's a big takeaway from that. Prior, we just explained that. So when you go to the FAFSA homepage, you're going to click on that FSA ID, and you're going to create one, right? Again, October 1st is the first day that FAFSA can be completed. The earlier the better. If you know that cost is a consideration, you're waiting to see what kind of federal aid you might qualify for. Student8.gov, this is a part of the U.S. Department of Education, and they just have helpful information on there in terms of looking at explaining that process of qualifying for financial aid and what the different sources are for it. Then they have some information that helps explain this. It can be a tedious process when you're applying for all these. Do we have it here?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. But this will help you fill out that FAFSA document for that. So one thing that's pretty handy is if you did file taxes and you can do this, they have an IRS data retrieval tool, so you can link this up electronically on this. Is anybody? I kind of do stuff like now when I'm paying for my student loans when I file for this each year. But it basically links it up so you don't need to manually send in like separate work for your tax return. You can link it up automatically, so it's pretty convenient with that. All right, but you sign in, you create, the first step is if this is your first time doing this, you create that FSA ID, and that becomes your login for when you fill that FAFSA out. All right, so you end up going to this website, you create that FSA ID.
There's actually a page in here that talks about how to do that. Walks you through the process.
Okay, and you have a student and a parent one, all right? So one thing to keep in mind is that you don't want to use your ACS ID because or your ACS email when you create this FSA ID because it won't work after graduation, and you have to apply for the FAFSA each year, right? So you want to use a personal email account for that, and then it has to be a separate one for the parent and a separate one for the student. Okay, so just keep that in mind. We encourage you to apply as early as possible. So as soon as it opens up in October, try to get that done as soon as possible. Again, with your situation for everybody that's graduating in 2020, that you'll be using that 2018 tax return document for it. All right. And then if you this probably applies to us. If you don't have a U.S. address that you use as your permanent address, you could use FC for foreign country, but you could see the details of how to fill that out when you go through that. If you link that IRS data retrieval, it does make this a lot easier because it'll automatically populate a lot of the fields in there. Some questions, it's about, even though it's about like 2018, there will be questions that say like as of today, when it's asking about your bank information, your savings. All right, so you might just pay attention to that because that's when it says as of today, that's the current one, not according to your 2018 tax return. With this, you could list up to 10 schools on the web application for the FAFSA to be directly linked to. You're not limited to these 10 schools. Later, you'll be able to if you decide that you apply to more universities.
Except we don't want you to apply to more than 10.
Yeah, but we don't want you to apply to more than 10. But
10
if that
is
list
plenty.
changes between October and the time you send your applications out in November or December, that's not a problem, right? But yeah, 10 is plenty. Okay, and again, if the parents aren't U.S. citizens, like that's not a problem if you don't have a tax return because there will be other documents that they could use to calculate your expected financial contribution as you go on through the FAFSA. FSA-ID is one of those things that you want to keep track of, right? Because you need to fill this out each subsequent year that you're doing this. You know, even in grad school, you'll be using this as well.
My first year here, we had a student that had gone to college. I didn't know her, but she'd gone to college, and her mother was just frantic in the office because she lost her funding because they forgot to fill it out again for the next year. Like, really? So.
Yeah. All right, so again, this definitely utilize this resource when you go to studentaid.ed.gov because it has a lot of videos that help you fill that out and that understand it, that will help you understand that. And it dispels a lot of myths too. Right?
Here's the myth.
The big one that we're hearing again is that you hear people say like I shouldn't, if I'm a U.S. citizen, I shouldn't apply for financial aid because that'll hurt my chance of admissions. It's different with international students, right? Because with international students, the federal government doesn't fund that aid. It would be from the institution. So then that plays a different role. Because you're a U.S. citizen, they can rely on the federal government if you have any demonstrated need. So it doesn't come from the university. They don't need to take that into account, right? So these are some resources that you could have if you need help filling out the FAFSA. We got specific questions with that. All right, CSS profile. This was developed by the College Board. One difference about this is that you actually have to pay to fill this out. Many universities, not all of them, require it. This is a little more expansive in the information that they require for it, though. All right, and the reason why they have that is just so they feel they could have a more accurate calculation of your EFC.
The universities that have a lot of their own funds, they have a lot of institutional funds that they're distributing. That's the schools that are going to be asking for this. There's probably about 400 schools in the U.S. that ask for this. So the FAFSA is the baseline for everybody. It's the federal thing, sometimes it's the state stuff, and some of the university stuff. This is often when there's an institution that has a lot of their own money.
How do you know that?
That the university will
They'll
tell
ask you for it.
The university will tell you to fill out the CSS profile. So it goes into the funding and the part of the website that says fees and funding and everything. They'll say I'm going to the FAFSA and the CSS profile or just the CSS. The very first time you see it, you need to fill it out. So
So when you're in the process.
yeah, when you're in the process. I think on the CSS profile website, I think they have a list of the schools that asked for it. But I'm not sure how you, I'm sure it's there. I haven't looked at it. College scholarship search profile. I think I just made that up. It was good though. It has to do with, scholarship is in there, so I think it's scholarship search.
Yeah.
Go with that.
But if you had a question at any institution, you mentioned that CSS profile, even any institution's admission office will know what you're talking about. So if you had a question about, like, do you require us to fill out the CSS profile, they'll answer that for you.
It'll be on the website.
Yeah. All right, so this is,
That's the website where you get.
that's a website, yeah, where you get the student college board. Again, not all of them do, but it's, a lot of institutions will ask for it just because they feel it's a more thorough way to help them calculate your EFC. And the key word is they're designed to support awarding institutional aid, right? So if you fill this out, it does help with that, being able for them to accurately assess that. And if you qualify for some of their institutional aid, so on top of the federal money that you might qualify for. I've heard that this is a little bit more of a pain to fill out, right? But if you're applying to an institution that looks at it, and you have a chance at more money, you're worth it, right? So they might also ask for, these are some other documents that they might ask for to help calculate your expected financial contribution. So parent tax returns, student tax returns, if a lot of students back home working part-time jobs, or if you worked over the summer, parent information if they're divorced or separated, and other information to verify, like your income if you own property, your assets that they're looking at, family size as we talked about before, that helps them calculate your family contribution if you have multiple students in college, and special circumstances like we discussed before about drastic change in income. If something happened between your 2018 tax return and your family's financial status now, let the university know when you're applying to that, right? So you can contact them and let them know that if there's something happened where there's some medical circumstances that require a lot of money, or if there's a job situation that changed, it's important to let that university know so they can keep that into account when they're calculating your EFC. All right, so the timeline for this, right now for juniors, for grade 11s, you're taking admissions tests, so that's SAT and ACT, SAT 2 for some people, right? Attend these university information meetings as we're having them come through in the spring. Talk to the reps that visit ACS. And this is good to establish that relationship and for you to be able to get that information. A lot of times the information, you'll see there's common information that applies to a lot of universities. So even if this might not be one that you considered before, it helps just to gather that knowledge about it. Use your resources to research the colleges and universities. So every student has their My Learning account. We discussed some other ways to research that. Your Big Future on College Board. And then check on the in-state residency requirements. Remember, if you think that you might qualify for in-state tuition in a certain state, make sure you get clarification from that university ahead of time, so that way you can provide those documents. Some places might require proof of residency or a license. You want to be able to, maybe this summer might be an opportunity to take care of that. Right? Get your FSA ID, the one that we talked about that you need for your FAFSA. Right, and doing well academically. It's a big one, especially, again, for merit-based aid. You're more likely to qualify for that if you stand out in their application pool, right, as a strong, desirable candidate that they want. Senior year, first semester. So complete your college applications. Our internal deadline is the last week of November, first week of December for that. That's for all of the universities that you're applying to, the US, Canada, and the UK. However, if you're applying to a certain university that has a deadline before that, obviously you got to go by that. Okay. You want to get the FSA ID for FAFSA. You can actually get your FSA ID now. All right. So you don't need to wait till you submit your FAFSA on October 1st. You could create your FSA ID now. All right. So you don't need to let that hang and wait till October 1st to be able to get that. All right, but make sure you get that, and so that way you can be as close to ready submitting by October 1st as possible. gather information needed for FAFSA and CSS. You can start looking at those websites now and see what documentation you'll need to upload, so that way you can gather that, especially if you're going home over the summer and you need that from institutions or banking institutions. It might be easier to gather that now while you're there in person. All right. Use the websites to search for third-party sources of financial assistance. All right. So there's a few that are out there. There's FastWeb, there's Unigo, and again, like if there might be some that you might qualify through your company that you work for, or the residence or local community scholarships of where you're located back home. That's something to look at too. Okay, and then check the university's websites for these three things. All right, the net cost calculators, whatever forms that they might need if they do require that CSS profile, and the deadlines. Many times for merit-based scholarships, often at many universities, you'll be considered for merit-based scholarships at the time that you apply just for general admissions, right? Many universities will require you to submit by a priority deadline. Right? So for example, like Purdue University, their priority deadline is November 1st, and if you're expecting to be considered for any kind of merit-based scholarships, you need to apply by November 1st for that as well. Right? So it's something to get clarification from the university for that. There are some universities that do require a separate application for merit-based financial aid. So the Jefferson or the scholarship at UVA is an example of one of those, right? Where that deadline for that scholarship is actually before the deadline, the regular application deadline for admissions. Right? So it's important that as you're devising this college list, you're meeting with your counselor now, and you're crafting that list of 10. That's something to look at over the summer in terms of what forms you need, when those deadlines are, if you're applying for merit-based aid, right? Okay, again, as soon as possible after October 1st, submit the FAFSA, all right? And review the student aid report for accuracy. So after that FAFSA is filled out, they'll come back to you with a student aid report that shows your expected, your EFC, your expected family contribution, and they'll show what kind of federal help that you might qualify for, all right? So if there's something that's inaccurate on there, you can notify, you can make corrections on there if they need some more information about finances from you. And this, you get this back within a few days of filling out and submitting your FAFSA. All right, so if a couple weeks go by and you haven't heard anything, that is something that you should follow up on. Okay.
Yeah. One thing, if your parents are not U.S. citizens, if your parents are U.S. citizens, they can do the electronic signature on the FAFSA form online. If they're not, that's not a problem. You fill out the form, print it, they sign it, and you mail it in. So you don't have, the parent doesn't have to be a U.S. citizen, the student does. So.
All right, and then if you have any additional schools that originally were 10 that you link to the FAFSA automatically, like if you change your mind about what schools you're applying to, then you can notify the university that you filled out the FAFSA, and that's available. All right. A lot of times when you get news back from universities at the time of admissions, many of them will they'll give you award letters, and they'll let you know if you qualify for any merit-based or institutional awards on that. So this is, as we're going through, you make this decision by May 1st with the American universities, right? So as students have been coming to us and they're showing where they've been accepted to, and calculating how much money that they've gotten in aid from each one, and they're going to compare and contrast, look at the total cost of attendance, see how much that leaves for them to pay, and that's going to be a factor in them making their decision. Right? So it's important to evaluate that and keep track of that. There's a form that I think is in the packet.
It's not in the packet, but I'll attach it.
Okay. That we could look at for that. All right, and then the university will give you pretty specific directions of next steps after you decide which one is a place for you. Typically, it's including a deposit that you need to make, but May 1st is the latest deadline for most of them.
I want to tell you a funny story that almost was tragic. I had a student who got a really, really exciting, big financial aid award from the school she really wanted to go to. And she's excited, her parents are excited and everything, and May 1st, I get a call from the university. And my friend that was in the office says, "Is she coming?" And I said, "Yeah." She says, "You want to tell her to make the deposit and send back the information she's coming?" She'd completely spaced that she had to actually follow through, make the deposit, and say, "I'm coming." So I called her and I said, "Have you made the deposit and done what you need to do?" "Huh?" So make sure that you do what they say to do, because she almost lost it. If the person had known me and called me, the May 1st is over and that scholarship is gone and that admissions place is gone.
And if you get that decision sooner, you don't have to wait till May 1st. Right? A lot of times you end up submitting for housing before then. If you got that decision, you know what you're doing. I'd say the earlier the better. There's a lot of the housing on campus gets taken, or and you can start looking at. There's a lot nowadays. There's point systems where they'll look at your interests and you can fill this out, and they match you up with like a roommate that might have like a similar lifestyle as you or whatever. So if you have this ahead of time, after you get your award letters back, the sooner you can make that decision, the better. All right, so May 1st is the latest that you should send that in by. All right, so this kind of goes back to when you get your award offers, your award letters back, what to consider as you're looking at that. All right, so the percentage of the cost to be covered by loans.
Flip and see if the form is in there.
Yeah. So we have this here, and again, this will be included in the digest this week when we put this out, right? But when you're looking at the percentage of the total cost of attendance that will be covered by loans, again, like loans aren't ideal, right? Because you got to pay that back with interest and time. So what's going to be covered by work? What's going to be covered by what's gift aid, right? So through grants or institutional aid that they give you. And what is a gap that you have left to pay over out of pocket, right? That's going to be some of the things that you're looking for when you're evaluating all your award letters and your acceptances that you get, okay? And something to keep in mind is that if that aid that you're getting is going to be coming each year, right? So you want to make sure of when that aid kicks in. So sometimes it's not guaranteed that it's going to be all 4 years. You want to pay attention to the details of that to make sure that's something that gets renewed, right? Okay. So these are the things that you want to look at. So we would recommend making a list and looking at this with a total cost of attendance. This is pretty hard to read. So if you look at the direct cost, tuition, the fees, the room and board, insurance if your insurance is required, and then looking at books, personal transportation, others, that's how you calculate that total cost of attendance. And then looking at what aid you get back, and then looking at your total out-of-pocket costs when you're assessing the finances for each place. Maybe, right, when all is said and done, and you look at the difference in your total out-of-pocket costs, maybe there's something that makes it worth it for you to go there, even though it might be more expensive than some other options, right? That's up to you to decide as a family, but at least lay it out all on the table so you can make that educated decision about what's worth it for you, right? Sports, this is another form. Not trying to crush any dreams here, okay? But if you haven't been in touch with a coach by now, realistically, they're not going to recruit you to play defensive end at University of Alabama, all right? And so this is something that if it happens, that's icing on the cake, but I wouldn't hold my breath for it, right? With Division I and Division II NCAA stuff, that National Collegiate Athletic Association in the U.S., that's really competitive, and that's something that students would be scouted for, recruited for from like early days. So it doesn't mean that you can't play sports in college, but there's a very small percentage of our students out here that would probably qualify for an NCAA scholarship, right? And there's two leagues that have this, NAIA, which is more smaller colleges, and NCAA Division I and II.
There's also a National Junior College Athletic Association, and a lot of the students that get started with that, because they do have funding for that, and do that, and then move up to a Division I school, and are able to play Division I the last couple of years.
That could be really, really competitive, actually, at National Junior College. So, anybody else ever seen that show, Last Chance U? No? You know what I'm talking about, Devin? Right? So that's something to keep in mind, but again, like you know, or you'd be having those conversations pretty early on if that was something that you were really gunning for, okay? Doesn't mean it's too late. If you end up going to one of these ID camps for Division I and you think you have a shot at that, you should contact your counselor and let us know now. But that's something to keep in mind for. All right. So, cost is a factor for most families when looking at the list of potential colleges that you're looking at, right? And when we're talking about that spread of colleges, when we talked about like your admission chances, you want to look at the cost too and assess that and see what's realistic for you, okay? Maybe at the end of the day, something might cost more, but for you and your family, there's a reason why you'd rather go there. Right, but that's something that you want to make sure you take into consideration all the factors before you make that decision, and you decide that. So this is, again, this kind of goes along with what I was just saying, where academic and personal choice might outweigh the cost. Right, so I think the number one reason, so if you look at the grade, that's this, according to the students, and the parents are in orange. A total of the two of them is in blue. But you see that the academic program for them up here was a bigger factor than the total cost in the end. Financial aid, prestige is at the bottom here. Right? So that's something that I'm happy to see because you don't want to get that elite institutional cognitive disorder. Right? But I mean, this is, again, we don't want to. It's important, like, to take into consideration all the factors when you're looking at this. Okay. All right. So facts of life. With that sticker price, all right. Initially, you might say, well, private schools are out of the picture. Realistically, though, know that you have a higher chance of qualifying for merit-based aid and institutional-based aid from those schools, right? So don't let that initial sticker price scare you. Do your research, find out what you might qualify for before you make that decision, okay? It is a good idea, just as we said before about looking at your reach schools, your target, and your safeties when you're looking at that academic profile. Definitely have some schools on that list that would be your safe financial schools, okay, where you know that, like, all right, I know that I can get in here and I can afford to go here, and I'd be happy going there, right? Definitely meet the deadlines, okay, because they're not forgiving about that. And then, make sure parents that you're having these open conversations with your students about the realities of, what you can afford and what you can't afford. Okay? It's important to talk about that early. Earlier applications are better. When we met in your junior meetings, hopefully everybody understands what early decision is, right? Early decision is a binding agreement. Remember, that's when you tell a school that no matter what, if you accept me, all right, I'm taking your offer, and not only am I taking your offer, no matter how much it costs, I'm going to say no, I'm going to withdraw my application to all the rest of the schools, no matter how much money they might offer me, right? So if you have financial constraints, right, or finances are a big consideration, we don't recommend to apply early decision anymore because that's a binding contract, right? Early application, non-restrictive, that would be really good to find. That would be a good option because you apply earlier and you get those responses earlier. Those award letters are typically, right? So that would be a good thing to do. Typically, early application, non-restrictive, you're looking at schools that are having that as early as November, right? So keep that in account. All right, so looking at all the financing options, start with those offered by college and which you're enrolling. So look at that institutional aid. in conjunction with that, any kind of financial aid you might receive from federal money. And, you know, it's important to ask, right? So with these reps that come in, with each university has a office of student financial aid that you could contact even ahead of time. You know, so if you have questions about that, make sure that you're asking, and you can contact the universities and ask. They got full-time people in that position that are experts in that field that can give you a good idea, and they could answer those questions.
I want to add something about looking at all financial aid options. Looking at like I said, your own company, and looking at in the HR office if there's something available. There's a lot of books out there that says, you know, scholarships for students. And you look at them and they have, you know, scholarships for people that are left-handed, blue-eyed, and have a Polish grandfather. And, you know, this kind of stuff. I've done this for approximately 125 years. I have never seen a kid get a scholarship from one of those organizations. I have seen people get scholarships through the university, and periodically I've seen them get it through the you know, business organizations, Rotary clubs, Lions clubs, things like that, through the churches, church organizations, and things like that. But the big thick books that say, you know, scholarships available, I've got some in the office. If you'd like it, use it as a doorstop about the use of it. They just don't pan out as easily as you think they're going to. But again, they've got them for everything. If you look at the University of California website and go through that, they have page after page of, would you like to be considered for these scholarships? And it's, you know, literally, you know, fourth generation